George casually rolled his shoulder as he walked back through the carnage towards what the Oxybaspians had told him was the galactic equivalent of the Yuan. Tossing alien cars into alien motherships was surprisingly easy when the cars were completely weightless. He couldn't help but grin at the rush of victory he felt. It was almost like being Superman, he thought before turning his mind to the peculiarities that had allowed such a situation. Freaking anti-gravity devices that can render me, and anything I touch, weightless, FDL drives and teleporters. And they've never even thought of armor, melee or projectile weapons, because they had natural defenses and fire. Did the trick when those wouldn't. Don't even understand the concept of a dogfight. So none of their ships are equipped for combat with other ships. And here I thought humans would have gotten the short end of the stick compared to them. He strolled back up to the council guard's barricade and was surprised to find dozens of people in armor, like his helping move the wounded. A lot of them had shed their helmets, so he was able to tell that they were Yexabaspians. But it still surprised him. Dude, have them copy my armor and mask to come help me? He smiled. That's really sweet of her. Then a dozen of the armored Yxabaspians ringed him imposingly, forming a wall of bodies facing him. George sighed at the clear attempt at containment as he subtly slid his foot back into a shallow combat stance. They're aliens. Maybe they're being friendly. The optimistic voice in his head supplied as he asked politely, is this an honor guard or an attempted arrest? Fighting them while they were wearing weightless iron-on armor would be a bit more difficult than the bug people exerternum, was it? Horde. It wouldn't be enough to stop him from winning, given that the concussion from his hits would still be enough to thoroughly incapacitate them. Without the weight of the armor, which N, the captain of her guard, had revealed was far more than even the strongest Yxabaspians could normally ever hope to move around in. He'd be able to corral, fling and dismantle them as easily as he had the exerternum. Them having armor would make it a little harder. Not a lot. Luckily, before any of them could reply and escalate the situation, a familiar voice snapped out. What are you idiots doing? George's face split into a smile as Pt8 stormed up, her helmet off to reveal her face screwed up in agitation. He'd been quite pleased and impressed to learn that. When she wasn't completely out of her element and in an extremely bad situation, she was actually quite the little spitfire. George had been quietly very impressed with IEES. His fortitude when he realized how bad the psionic pressure was as the entire contingent of Yxabaspian Royal Guard was knocked smooth unconscious when they'd opened the door into the room he and E were in. On the other hand, had regained her feet by then, and was able to use the synthesizer to make a hat from what she claimed were the two strongest psionic dampening agents in the galaxy. George had gotten quite a good chuckle when he realized upon examining the elements in question that it was basically a very nice tinfoil hat. Once George had gotten the lead lined aluminum hat on to muffle his psionic output, it was as though the Yxabaspian princess had traded the heart of a mouse for that of a lion. When they woke up, SIC's royal guard hadn't been pleased about how casually he treated her. They hadn't been pleased about him being near her at all, for that matter. But he had put them in their place quite firmly, owning another blush when George gleefully informed her that she was just making herself even more attractive by Earth standards. Sticking up for her friend like that. They'd made far more headway in their relationship. Once UC wasn't on the verge of bolting in terror, just from being near him, and he'd actually managed to get over the majority of his disorientation and nerves as well. Thankfully, the Yxabaspian synthesizer had been able to make identical parts of different materials so that George could swap parts to not lose the advantage of that psionic pressure. Once George had understood how powerful his psionic emissions were, he'd asked for a psionic amplifying agent to help deal with the exerternum army when they got word of the attack on the capital. It only made a mask of it, along with a second one to swap it out for to muffle the emissions when he wasn't fighting. But the effects had been very impressive. Not a single Axetanim had even considered fleeing from him until he was halfway through the battalion on the ship. The ones attacking the capital had broken into a full retreat after only a moment or two. When George was done slaughtering them, he'd swapped the amplifying mask for the muffler before heading back towards the council building. No need to give anyone a heart attack, George mused. The Yixabay guards he assumed were also wearing tinfoil helmets, since it wouldn't make sense to George for them to not have some protection of their own in case his helmet came off. So if they did want to fight, it would be a physical confrontation instead of the instant coups he'd accidentally dealt them on the ship. Not being able to use the literal psychic warfare would have made the fight a teeny bit more difficult. But thankfully, Ebnu had better sense than her guards, the apparent leader of the group, who George recognized by the voice as the captain of the Royal Guard contingent that had been sent to pick. Up protested Princess. The council has ordered, screw the council. LUS snapped, not caring about the looks of shock the loud declaration drew her. This warrior just saved the entire galaxy twice. He's a hero even if he's a Class 6 Death Welder. Honor Guard form up. The Yixabay guards snapped to attention, the obedience to their crown princess and her family so hardwired into them that even being ordered to provide the kind of escort usually reserved for the royal family to a Death Welder couldn't keep them from obeying. George proffered the princess an arm. "Shall we, your highness?" He looked at the arm curiously. Shall we what?" George grimaced lightly behind his helmet. "Oh right, I forgot. On Earth, this is a gesture indicating one wishes friendly accompaniment as equals. If you wanted to accept, you'd loop your arm through mine and we'd go together." Understanding lit. "Oh, Zoyuri." And she smiled. "As much as you've earned that today, please remember that I am the crown princess of one of the wealthiest species in the galaxy. We can't fraternize so lightly." George started to frown, and then she turned towards the council building. "I will be happy to accompany you though, as equals, even if I can't indulge your people's custom for now. Besides, we're both wearing artificial carapaces. Covered in metal claws, physical contact right now would probably be a bad idea. Maybe later. I'm curious to test out some of those things our scanner found out about our species' compatibility." George's smile returned in full, and then some, as the Yixabay honor guard made some interesting noises of protest. Paid them no mind? Come on, the council's waiting.